In the 12th and 13th century, the concept of the marvel or marvelous entered high culture. French historian Jacques Le Goff defines the marvel or mirabilia in the medieval imagination as consisting of enlargements or distortions of the normal natural world, which creates an existence of something that does not exist in order to compensate for the banality of everyday life. Courtly romance is an example in literature, as a knight is tested by a series of marvels. Quoting Le Goff, in the medieval West, the mirabilia tended to create a world that was sort of an inverted mirror image of the real world, a world in which food was plentiful and people went naked, enjoyed sexual freedom, and did not work. Even though Le Goff does not associate the marvel with life in the monastery, I assert that monks and Cistercian monasteries act as an inverted image on the other extreme from the marvel exemplified in courtly romance. A site where only minimal amount of food necessary to sustain life was eaten, a singular subdued color cloth shrouded the monk, an adamant refusal of any physical sexual pleasure, and immense labor depicts the life of the Cistercian monk, or an inverted marvel. In this audio essay, I examine the Cistercian monk and founder of the monastery at Clairvaux, Saint Bernard, as a marvel, an example of living as minimally as possible in the physical world in order to provide for a rich and imaginative spiritual life. Saint Bernard is best known for his polemical letter known as the Apologia, distributed in 1124, renouncing the multitudes of decoration, ornamentation, and sculpted images found within the monastery at Cluny. Quoting from Apologia, "What is more, what is the point of ridiculous monstrosities in the cloister, where there are brethren reading? I mean those extraordinary deformed beauties and beautiful deformities. What are those lascivious apes doing, those fierce lions, monstrous centaurs, half men, and spotted pards? What is the meaning of fighting soldiers and horn-blowing hunters? You can see several bodies attached to one head, or the other way around, many heads joined to one body. Here a serpent's tail is to be seen on a four-footed beast. There's a fish with an animal's head. There is a creature starting out as a horse, whilst the rear half of a goat brings up the rear. Here a horned beast generates the rear of a horse. Indeed, there are so many things and everywhere such extraordinary variety of hybrid forms, that it is more diverting to decipher marble than the text before you, and to spend the whole day gazing at such singularities in preference to meditating upon God's law." Michael Camille in Image on the Edge, and Umberto Eco in Art and Beauty in the Middle Ages highlight Bernard's proficiency with language, using his own rhetoric as a form of sculpture in order to denounce the sculptures in churches. St. Bernard takes a certain delight in describing these excesses through the written word. Beyond language, St. Bernard also understood the extreme nature of life as a monk. In this quote, he draws a parallel between the contorted body of an acrobat and that of a monk. "I say it is a good sort of playing in which we become an object of reproach to the rich and of ridicule to the proud. In fact, what else do seculars think we are doing but playing, when what they desire most on earth we fly from, and what they fly from we desire? Like acrobats and jugglers who, with their heads down and feet up, stand or walk on their hands, and thus draw all eyes to themselves. But this is not a game for children or the theater, where lust is excited by the effeminate and the indecent contortions of the actors. It is a joyous game, decent, grave, and admirable, delighting the gaze of heavenly onlookers." Even monasteries act as a distortion from the normal world, physically occupying the edge. The monastery was located on virgin land, removed from civilization, in the middle of a forest, and close to a stream. The site must require the resources for the monks to remain self-sufficient. St. Bernard often uses the metaphoric dimension of the placeless monastery through his reference of the monk as a dweller in Jerusalem. It is not about occupying the physical location of Jerusalem, but a place where the monk can turn away from the world of sin, become close to God, and surrounded by angels and saints. St. Bernard wrote, "He has become not a visitor who admired the city as a traveler, but as one of its devoted inhabitants, one of its authentic citizens, not of the earthly Jerusalem comparable to Mount Sinai in Arabia, which is with all its children in slavery, but of the one above, the free Jerusalem, our mother. And if you must know, I am speaking of Clairvaux. There one can find a Jerusalem associated with the heavenly one, through the heart's complete devotion, through the imitation of its life, and through real spiritual kinship. There, henceforth, he will find rest, according to the promise of the Lord, forever and ever. He wanted to dwell there, because there is to be found, if not as yet the vision, at least the expectation, in all security, of the true peace, of which it is said, the peace of God surpasses all understanding." When all forms of ornamentation, color, sculpture, variety of materials, are removed in monasteries, an abstraction remains that favors proportion and repetition while elevating the craft of construction. The architecture of Cistercian monasteries highlights skill, honing in on austere elegance of the space created. The abstraction allows for the empty and uneventful to become rich and imaginative within the mind, as scholar M.B. Pranger eloquently describes in The Artificiality of Christianity. Quote, "Rather, those biblical images have become disfigured, so to speak, and absorbed in an empty space. The monk who is praying and singing in this space does not relate his inner thoughts to outer images. There simply are none. As a consequence, he has to produce single-handedly a language, both liturgical and devotional, that can stand up to the emptiness of the place. Even greater creativity is demanded from an author such as Bernard, who takes it upon himself to give a literary account of what is going on inside that empty monastery. Because he has lost the support of visual images, the literary images he uses to fill up that space are bound to look like a performance on an empty stage. Thus forced to stand on their own feet, these images become intensely theatrical." Unquote. The emptiness enables the monk to fill and create the space with his own repertoire of images, driving the inward contemplation and active imagination of the monk's devotion to God. The ascetic space sets up its own paradox, generating a fullness within and because of the emptiness. Cistercian monasteries were a collection of nothing in order to perpetuate a collection of everything. With a lack of visual stimulus, the monk could perpetually recreate the paradise lost. The space establishes endless repetition, slowing down or halting the experience while it is kept alive and ornamented through memory. The expansive and resonant architecture and the elaborately ornamented text in sermons and illuminated manuscripts for the Cistercians exemplified the paradox of the minimal beckoning the exaggerative, the motionless activated through memory, and the emptiness fulfilled by meditation.